Chapter 3, Part 3. After all, the task of the humanists is surely not that of pitting their slogans against the slogans of the oppressors, with the oppressed as the testing ground, housing the slogans of first one group and then the other. On the contrary, the task of the humanists is to see that the oppressed become aware of the fact that as dual beings, housing the oppressors within themselves, they cannot be truly human. This task implies that revolutionary leaders do not go to the people in order to bring them a message of salvation, but in order to come to know through dialogue with them both their objective situation and their awareness of that situation, the various levels of perception of themselves and of the world in which and with which they exist. One cannot expect positive results from an educational or political action program which fails to respect the particular view of the world held by the people. Such a program constitutes cultural invasion, good intentions notwithstanding. The starting point for organizing the program content of education or political action must be the present, existential, concrete situation reflecting the aspirations of the people. Utilizing certain basic contradictions, we must pose this existential, concrete, present situation to the people as a problem which challenges them and requires a response, not just at the intellectual level, but at the level of action. We must never merely discourse on the present situation, must never provide the people with programs which have little or nothing to do with their preoccupations, doubts, hopes, and fears, programs which at times in fact increase the fears of the oppressed consciousness. It is not our role to speak to the people about our own view of the world, nor to attempt to impose that view upon them, but rather to dialogue with the people about their view and ours. We must realize that their view of the world, manifested variously in their action, reflects their situation in the world. Educational and political action which is not critically aware of this situation runs the risk either of banking or of preaching in the desert. Often, educators and politicians speak and are not understood because their language is not attuned to the concrete situation of the people they address. Accordingly, their talk is just alienated and alienating rhetoric. The language of the educator or the politician, and it seems more and more clear that the latter must also become an educator in the broadest sense of the word, like the language of the people, cannot exist without thought, and neither language nor thought can exist without a structure to which they refer. In order to communicate effectively, educator and politician must understand the structural conditions in which the thought and language of the people are dialectically framed. It is to the reality which mediates men and to the perception of that reality held by educators and people that we must go to find the program content of education. The investigation of what I have termed the people's thematic universe, the complex of their generative themes, inaugurates the dialogue of education as the practice of freedom. The methodology of that investigation must likewise be dialogical, affording the opportunity both to discover generative themes and to simulate people's awareness in regard to these themes. Consistent with the liberating purpose of dialogical education, the object of the investigation is not persons, as if they were anatomical fragments, but rather the thought language with which men and women refer to reality, the levels at which they perceive that reality and their view of the world, in which their generative themes are found. Before describing a generative theme more precisely, which will also clarify what is meant by a minimum thematic universe, it seems to me indispensable to present a few preliminary reflections. The concept of a generative theme is neither an arbitrary invention nor a working hypothesis to be proved. If it were a hypothesis to be proved, the initial investigation would seek not to ascertain the nature of the theme, but rather the very existence or non-existence of themes themselves. In that event, before attempting to understand the theme in its richness, its significance, its plurality, its transformations, and its historical composition, we would first have to verify whether or not it is an objective fact. Only then could we proceed to apprehend it. Although an attitude of critical doubt is legitimate, it does appear possible to verify the reality of the generative theme, not only through one's own existential experience, but also through critical reflection on the human world relationship and on the relationships between people implicit in the former. This point deserves more attention. One may well remember, trite as it seems, that, of the uncompleted beings, man is the only one to treat not only his actions but his very self as the object of his reflection. This capacity distinguishes him from the animals, which are unable to separate themselves from their activity and thus are unable to reflect upon it. In this apparently superficial distinction lie the boundaries which delimit the action of each in his life space. Because the animal's activity is an extension of themselves, the results of that activity are also inseparable from themselves. Animals can neither set objectives nor infuse their transformation of nature with any significance beyond itself. Moreover, the decision to perform this activity belongs not to them but to their species. Animals are, accordingly, fundamentally beings in themselves. Unable to decide for themselves, unable to objectify either themselves or their activity, lacking objectives which they themselves have set, living submerged in a world to which they can give no meaning, lacking a tomorrow and a today, because they exist in an overwhelming present, animals are ahistorical. Their ahistorical life does not occur in the world, taken in its strict meaning. For the animal, the world does not constitute a not I, which could set him apart as an I. The human world, which is historical, serves as a mere prop for the being in itself. Animals are not challenged by the configuration which confronts them. They are merely stimulated. Their life is not one of risk-taking, for they are not aware of taking risks. Risks are not challenges perceived upon reflection, but merely noted by the signs which indicate them. They accordingly do not require decision-making responses. Consequently, animals cannot commit themselves. Their ahistorical condition does not permit them to take on life. Because they do not take it on, they cannot construct it, and if they do not construct it, they cannot transform its configuration, nor can they know themselves to be destroyed by life, for they cannot expand their prop world into a meaningful symbolic world which includes culture and history. As a result, animals do not animalize their configuration in order to animalize themselves, nor do they de-animalize themselves. Even in the forest, they remain beings in themselves, as animal-like there as in the zoo. In contrast, the people, aware of their activity and the world in which they are situated, acting in function of the objectives which they propose, having the seat of their decisions located in themselves and in their relations with the world and with others, infusing the world with their creative presence by means of the transformation they effect upon it. Unlike animals, not only live but exist, and their existence is historical. Animals live out their lives on an atemporal, flat, uniform prop. Humans exist in a world which they are constantly recreating and transforming. End of chapter 3, part 3.